There's a word, it's actually a very, very old word. It's Greek in origin, but it came to prominence just over 500 years ago during the Protestant Reformation, and it has since sort of gone out of favor, but I want to bring it in front of you today so that we can have a conversation. The word is Adiaphora. Can you say that with me? Adiaphora. It's a fun word to say. By the way, if you're ever at a barbecue or a cocktail party, this is the fun kind of word you can drop in and people will be very impressed. But adiaphora is one of those words that means indifference. It's sort of an odd word, but how it came to be used in the Protestant Reformation was it was a category of things that was neither forbidden in Scripture or prescribed in Scripture. So it was neither you couldn't do it or you had to do it. It was sort of a middle ground. And I love this word, adiaphora. And I want to tell you about some ways I think it could be used by us in our culture today. But before I get there, I need to tell you a story. The first time I ever had the opportunity to travel internationally, we were on our way to Russia. But because I had never traveled internationally, the person taking me on the trip thought it would be smart to stop in Germany first so I could practice being cross-cultural in a semi-friendly environment, as if Germany is a friendly environment, before we got to Russia, where the stakes would be a little higher. And so we were in Germany, and we were making our way around, and I was learning how to, for instance, buy subway tickets when you don't speak the language, and how to exchange money, and how to order dinner, and all that kind of stuff you have to do when you travel internationally. And one of the places we stopped was this amazing castle in Marburg, Germany. And as we were getting the tour around there, a couple of interesting things happened. Is that we took a tour of an actual castle, and we walked along the walls of the castle. And when we were up there, there was a plaque on the side of one of the walls that said this is where a meeting had happened, the Marburg Colloquy, I think it was called, where Martin Luther and Zwingli, two of the main characters in the Protestant Reformation, they had met there with about a dozen other people from many other countries to try and bring unity to the Protestant Reformation. Once they had left the Catholic Church, they fractured into so many parts, and so this was an attempt to bring unity to the Protestant Church. I couldn't believe I was standing in the place where this kind of a thing happened. And it turns out, according to the plaque, that they were able to agree on absolutely everything except for one thing. Does anyone know what that one thing is? Anyone want to take a guess? Communion. They couldn't agree on whether the real presence of Christ was in the communion elements. I found this absolutely astounding. That the Protestant Reformation came within one issue of having a unity that would have completely changed the trajectory of Christianity. And the issue, ironically, that kept them divided was communion. Does anyone want to guess, by the way, we're talking about this on World Communion Sunday? You see what I did there? It's pretty good, right? It's appropriate. That is shocking to me. Like, not even infant baptism or believer's second baptism for the Anabaptists. Like, these really amazingly big topics. It was communion. The thing that is supposed to bring us together is what kept us apart. So, 15 years later, I'm in seminary, and I learned this word, adiaphora, from my Lutheran church history teacher. And I raise my hand and I say, oh my goodness, but don't you think it's weird about Marburg and the fact that they couldn't see that communion could fit into this adiaphora, right? This middle ground, that they couldn't agree to disagree, that Adiaphora would mean that it was neither prescribed or forbidden, but that it was sort of a middle ground. And I just was heartbroken that they couldn't agree to disagree. So put a pin in that for a minute. We might come back to that in a second. I had a different experience that still haunts me to this day. When I was going to school at Claremont, we had a professor. His name was Philip Clayton. And he had written a book about the certainty of belief. And he had actually come up with this really novel concept of ranking your beliefs or your convictions on a scale. I think it was 1 to 6 at the time. So like 1 is things you're not sure about, and 6 is things you're absolutely confident in. Like, so what's your confidence level in this? How certain are you? And it was just so helpful to me to have something like this, to say like, well, I guess on this issue, I'm sort of confident, but it's not really that important. So that's like Adiaphora, right? That's a 1. But this other thing is so central to my faith and to my conviction that I don't really think it's debatable. So I'll put that at a 6, right? And then to have some grades between them. Well, one of the applications of that scale that I got from Philip Clayton was that I had a friend. I met him 34 years ago when he was a Bible college student. And at the time, he was just a friend, and we would play basketball together. But we ended up in the same family. We ended up being a part of the same family. And so every other year, I spend weeks upon of time with him, of unbroken time. And for about the first 20 years, we loved debating theology. We would argue about the Bible and different topics and all sorts of other things. And that was fun for a while, but after about 20 years of that, it got sort of boring. And I wanted to have a different conversation with him. So I called him on the phone. I said, hey, I'm going to see you in a couple weeks. I was wondering if you would do an experiment ahead of our getting together where you take all the things that you and I normally talk about, and would you do me a favor and rank them from 1 to 10? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important are they to you? So things that are really important, put them as a 1. This is a 1. And things that are like not that important, or maybe you're not that certain about, just let me know that it's a 4, so that when we're debating, I know whether this is like something really important and central to you, or whether it's sort of icing on the cake and not to take it too seriously, right? So let me know on a scale of 1 to 10 how important or central these things are to you. And he said, nope, no can do. I said, why? He said, everything's a 1. And he was being serious. And I knew he was being serious because I came from that same background. I came from a background where everything is central. And it all props each other up like a house of cards. And if you start shifting around like Jenga pieces, if you start shifting around one thing from another, the whole thing might crumble, right? Your whole faith structure might disintegrate. Everything's a 1. And so I said to him, well, man, I gotta be honest, that's an untenable situation, because no matter what the topic is, from salvation to speaking in tongues to women in ministry or whatever the issue is, same-sex marriage, if everything's a 1, that just is an impossible standard, because the intensity level is always at the highest and there's no wiggle room for anything. That's an undoable ranking system if everything's 1. But I'm glad that I had that conversation with him, because several years later, I was pastoring in a United Methodist church, and we happened to have a group of young people. They didn't know each other until they came to the church, but we just had this migration of people who started coming to our church who were ex-evangelical. They used to be evangelical, and they're not anymore, They're post-evangelicals. They still wanted some kind of a faith or a belief, but they just didn't believe what they used to believe. And they migrated in and found a home in our open-minded, progressive, accepting church, okay? And they would invite their friends, and their friends would come, and it worked really well, and it was great. But once in a while, somebody would come, and they would say, hey, Pastor Bo, I love that we can ask any question here. We can bring our doubts, we can bring our differences, we don't all have to agree. I absolutely love it. But here's the thing. I can't be a member of this church because I am terrified that if we are wrong on one of these issues, and it was usually LGBT inclusion, so if we are wrong on the gay thing, they would call it, if we're wrong about gays, that's the kind of thing you can go to hell for. And I realized that in a belief structure where everything's a one, you can't afford to be wrong on any single thing because the hell of that belief system hangs over your head. It is like a specter that constantly haunts you, like a ghost of Christmas past that haunts you and says, you can pretend to be open and affirming and accepting and loving and kind, but if you're wrong, there will be hell to pay. And I realized that the presence of hell was such a heavy and consequential subject for people. And I didn't know what to do about it at first. And then an idea came to me. So I thought, well, why don't we just name the elephant in the room? So I started going back to people and saying, I know you're nervous about the gay issue, but why are you so confident about the hell issue? Are you sure you got hell right? Because you seem pretty certain that there's a hell and about the kind of people that end up there. And that's keeping you from being certain about the open and affirming issue. But what if you're wrong on the hell issue? And it turns out that that was the right thing to do because that little switch took the power away. It took the sting out of this fear of getting things wrong in hell. And it actually freed people up to say, I never really thought about that before. And then you can have a different kind of conversation. This same thing, by the way, happened a few years later when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was very concerned that there are people who call themselves Christians who he doesn't think are Christians. And I agreed with him. I said, yeah, I think that there are all sorts of people who are under the impression that they're Christians who aren't Christians. So we had agreement there, right? And as the conversation followed, it became clear to me that I meant something different by that than he did, right? That by Christ's call, there are people who are going to be surprised that God thinks they did a good job by feeding the hungry and giving right care to those in need. And that the story of the sheep and the goats, they're surprised that they're in. And there's also going to be people who are surprised that they're out. They'll say, no, Lord, I knew you. And he'll say, no, you didn't. You didn't do these things that I asked you to do. Right? Which goes back to our scripture passage for today that says, put these into practice. So my friend was saying, we were saying, who is a Christian? There's groups who call themselves Christian, but they're not Christian. And we were talking about this. And then his language changed, and he said, they're not going to get into heaven. I said, whoa. What'd you just do there? You just moved to the goalpost. We were talking about calling yourself a Christian. Like on earth, who gets to say, I'm a Christian? This is I belong. You just changed the goalpost. And you're talking about who gets into heaven. That's a different category. He said, what do you mean? I said, there are people who think they're Christians who aren't getting into heaven. He said, yeah. I said, and there are people who are getting into heaven who don't know they're Christians. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it dawned on me in these years of conversations that I've been having with people that because we don't have a category of Adiaphora, things that are either very clear, prescribed in Scripture, or not forbidden, but because we don't have a middle ground, we don't know how to agree to disagree. We're either all in or all out. And I see this all the time. Let's say a guy like Cooper, he comes up with a really good idea, and somebody will go, yeah, I really like that, and he wants to do this ministry. Maybe we should give to that ministry. Maybe we should support that thing he's doing. And then somebody will say, yeah, but he's a part of a church that believes this, right? They'll move the goalposts. But because we don't have a category of Adiaphora to say, wait, let's just agree to disagree about that middle thing, and let's focus on practicing our faith in service to our community. We are suffering for being all in or all out. And there's people who think that if they don't agree with any given church on every single issue, that they can't be a part of that church. So it's a gift to them to say, no, it's not like that here. We work a little different. We have this category where we know that we don't all agree, and we're okay with that. Because we have some things that are really central, and so we have some things that are like not as important. But in the middle, we've agreed we're going to be part of community and we're going to serve together, even though we don't all agree or believe the same things, right? That's Adiaphora. And the last thing I want to say about this is how important this concept is for us as Methodists today. Because if you Google United Methodists, the very first page is going to be filled with news about a split and those who want to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. We're going through a really difficult time as a denomination. And I think that a concept like Adiaphora could be helpful to us to say, are there things we agree about and things we disagree about? And more importantly, can we agree to disagree? Because the spirit of being united, like our first name is United, but if we don't have an understanding of Adiaphora, right, of middle ground, agreeing to disagree, it's tough to stay united if you think you have to be all in, or let's say all right on every issue. And I just want to say, in a very strange twist of history, I want to say thank you to the conservatives who are disaffiliating from the United Methodist Church. Now, this is going to sound weird to you, but history is often weirder than we're taught. Several years ago, we had a big conference, and the global church was deciding whether to allow same-sex marriages. And the conservatives won. Now, there was a big argument about how they won, and they pulled some stunts through legislation and Robert's rules and some other things, but they won, okay? And the global church voted to be, nope, we're not allowing same-sex marriage. And then an interesting thing happened. The conservatives, and I'm going to say, in the Spirit of Christ, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, in the Spirit of Christ. After about a year, they had an amazing epiphany. And they said, you know what? We won the argument on a technicality, but we haven't won the hearts of our sisters and brothers. And maybe that's not worth winning. So even though they technically had won, they relented. And they said, you know what? You all can keep the United Methodist Church. We'll leave. And so the conservatives are disaffiliating and forming their own group. And I just think that's one of the weirdest twists I've ever heard. They won. But they realized that they didn't win over the hearts of those who disagree with them. And so in a stunning move, they have turned over and said, you all can keep the institutions and the buildings and the bylaws and the discipline and the name, right? And the universities, and you can keep all that. We'll go and form our own group. And that is just the strangest twist I can possibly imagine. So on this World Communion Sunday, where we're talking about Adiaphora and the fact that at Marburg Castle, that the communion was the one thing they couldn't agree on. And then in all of the twists and turns of American Christianity and its impact in the global conversation, we find ourselves in a very strange moment where the united in Methodists are not united. And I think it's time that we visit some old words to try and forge a new way as a denomination. And I'm going to propose that Adiaphora might be one of those words.